Good morning, Keller Williams, Santa Clara.
Good morning, Mark.
What's going on? Claudia, it's been a while. How you doing?
I'm doing good. How about yourself?
Doing good too. AJ, welcome.
Thanks, boss.
You too. Neha, welcome.
Hello, Mark.
And then Santa Clara Valley could be one of many people. Hopefully, probably either Laura or Stacy or Brenda. Welcome. So what's going on, guys? I haven't seen you guys in a few weeks. What's new and improved? Anyone have anything good to say?
Putting in an offer tomorrow.
Yeah.
What?
Good man.
Thank you.
Looks like we got more people coming in too. I'm going to turn this silly waiting room thing off because I don't like people coming in. All right, so new contract coming out tomorrow for AJ. Good luck with the offer, man. Good luck on that. Anyone else have any interesting activity coming on? Working on anything fun? So once a month, we're going to get together. I guess this is like an open forum for questions, answers, contract situations, and basically access to answer any of the questions you guys might have. What you guys are going through, and if you guys want to go beyond the contracts, talk about lead gen, this is your hour. So you tell me what you want to hear. It's a participation class. Yeah, otherwise we're all going to be like asleep soon because no one wants to talk about it. Okay, so Gabby, the new RPA. All right. Anything specific about the new RPA that you'd like to know?
I do know that there was I believe a class last Thursday or every Thursday that goes over the RPA, but I missed it. I haven't had a chance to know what's new about it. What's the new part about it?
Oh, it's kind of restructured from the other contract, and they added a few pages. Although it's longer, I think it's much easier to complete, much easier to explain to your clients, and much easier to kind of navigate the whole process of counter offers and things of that nature, just because the way it's structured.
I do know that I think, I don't know where I saw it, but they offer you to purchase to check it out, pretty much to review it. Do you think we should buy it or just go elsewhere to pretty much review it?
It's up to you. You can buy the course from the board. It'll give you a quick rundown and a highlight of what's new and how to help you figure it out. I think if you YouTube our channel, I think I go over it more than once. I believe it's recorded. It's out there somewhere with my take on the new contracts. So it should be out there as well for you to review at your convenience. And if you're nice and make a small donation to KW Cares, we may have one of those in the office
perfect.
for you.
I'll check that out. Yes. Yeah. I got that donation too.
Yeah. So you don't have to worry about buying it from the board necessarily, but you should become a master of it. So as much information as you can about it, review it. If you have questions, and that's what this session's for, right? So answer those questions and help you get clarity and make sure you guys are good with explaining everything to your clients. So, let me, I can pull it up here. Just give me 1 second. See what's up. That's through it. Just besides just the general overview of the contract, does anyone else have any issues or questions you want to make sure that are addressed?
Yeah. The risk of waiving disclosures, which ones are most powerful? which ones can we kind of hang on to, or like how different ways to leverage without putting our clients at risk.
Okay. Now, when you say disclosure, you disclosures and documents that need to be filled out by the seller talking about the property, or are we talking about contingencies?
Contingencies. We're talking.
Contingencies, okay.
Yeah, my apologies.
No, nothing to apologize for. Just want to make sure that I'm clear talking about the right thing. So we'll talk about that for sure. Okay. Anything else you guys want to talk about?
Breaking into listings, if you got time.
Yeah. For that, we make time.
Yeah.
Breaking, getting listings is very important. So right
Quick
now,
question.
yeah.
For the so I'm on YouTube trying to look up the KW Cares. Any way I could get a link, because I'm on here, but I don't think it's the right
Oh
one.
yeah, no. To do that, you're just gonna talk to Stacy.
Okay, talk to Stacy. Okay,
Yeah,
perfect.
okay.
Okay. I'll
You have to type in Santa Clara Valley for it
Okay.
to show up.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Or you guys see my screen? Contract I'm scrolling through. Fair housing and things of that nature, all the pre-contract paperwork. So interesting that you mentioned your question and framed it in terms of disclosures and not necessarily contingencies, because there is one very, very drastic difference in this contract versus the last contract. And it's drastic in that it changes the risk of not completing documents, if you will, and it puts it onto the buyer, whereas before it was different. Let me explain how. The seller is contractually legally obligated to provide disclosures to the buyer, everything they know about the property. They perform this by completing the transfer disclosure statement and the seller property questionnaire. Those two documents, the seller, that's the seller's testimony about the property. The other types of testimonies about the property are inspections, right? Property inspection, turbine inspection, roof inspection. Diligent listing agent usually provides these documents up front for the buyers to review, therefore eliminating or reducing the need for contingencies on property condition and inspections, considering these things are provided up front. With the old contract, if something was missing, like a transfer disclosure statement or the seller property questionnaire, or an AVID, the agent visual inspection disclosure, was not part of the disclosures, and the buyer removed their contingencies, yet received those documents later, okay? In the past, that would open up a window of 5 days for the buyer to review the new information, and they would have an opportunity to back out via contingency based on this new information. This new contract is written different. If the buyer is removing their contingencies with the offer, or at any time the buyer is removing their contingencies, and the buyer has not yet received those documents in question, with the new contract, it says the buyer waives their right to inspect those documents and protect their earnest money deposit. So if there isn't a TDS in the disclosure package, your buyer's agent, you guys are removing the contingency, means you don't care what's on the TDS. Some cases it's true. Some cases the property is just a dog. Your buyer's a professional contractor. They don't care. They're going to wipe it, build a new house. They don't care what's on there. So they can make a non-contingent offer without seeing a TDS. But the majority of people that are buying today, right, they're end user consumers, they should review a TDS and inspections prior to removing any property condition contingencies. If you do so, you take the risk in the new contract. In the old contract, you could get out of it with technicalities. There's always technicalities. But the way they wrote the new one, they closed those technicalities in the proper spirit of the game. Right now, someone wants to take on the risk for making their offer seem better. Well, That's on them. That's on them. Just make sure, guys, that you understand that understand your clients and their expertise. You know, if you're working with first-time home buyers, yeah, I want to see inspections and disclosures before you remove contingencies. That's absolute. That's an absolute. Now, if you're working with a seasoned investor or a contractor, it's a different story that are experts themselves. Then you may have a different story. They may take their own expertise as a higher grade, if you will, and rely on their own observation for their informational purposes, and they can comfortably move forward based, you know, on their expertise, right? So understand your clients and who they are, what they're going to do. So the new contract is nice in that it creates this beautiful chart. It's a few pages long, but it's paragraph 3. And in this chart, they've condensed basically every point of negotiation in the contract, right? What are the points that we can negotiate? Well, A, purchase price, the biggest, the probably most important one. Purchase price, that's 3A. When is the deal going to close? Close of escrow is 3B. When is this offer going to expire? Put that right up front. Let people know this offer is only good, well, by default, 3 days. But you know, if you're a diligent buyer's agent, I expire it usually right after the offer is presented to a seller. I want them to linger on it for too long. That strategy, whatever you like to do, you know, everyone has their own opinion, and that's the best way to go. I'm not always right, usually, but not always. So, you know, it's not wrong to question me.
So what's your thoughts there then? You're saying as soon as the offer expires right after it's been viewed?
You know, it depends on the situation. Every situation is different. But in most cases, I get okay, what are you going to ask the agent when they're presenting the offer? It's like we submitted, let's say we submitted at noon. They're going to do their due diligence, and then they're meet with their client at 5. Oh, you're meeting with your client at 5? Okay, so are they going to make a decision tonight? Yeah, we're probably going to make a decision tonight. Okay, then I expect an answer before midnight, and I expire the offer at midnight. So you can review your offer, and then, you know, if I don't hear from you by midnight, I assume you're working with somebody else. It's good for him to make sure that the agent responds within the timeline in the contract, but only really makes sense is if the offer is in contention, right? If you send a low ball and you're wondering why the other side isn't calling you, it's because you sent a low ball and you're not in the game. That's it. You know.
So then if you're putting in a really strong offer, then you want that ASAP, because then your client can move on to the next one if in time. But on the reverse side, I imagine if you're trying to hold out for a deal or your client isn't in the strongest position, maybe you want to leave the offer on the table, or is that,
Well, that happens sometimes, right? It depends on your relative strength, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Relative strength. You know, if you know there's 10 other offers, if you're the best offer, they're going to call you before the end of the day.
Right.
If you're not, they're not. So that's why I do it that way. So if I think I'm going to have a really strong, good offer, I don't want them to have to, I want them to have the least amount of time to leverage my offer. Right. So if I have the best offer, I want it accepted tonight. I don't need you going back and forth with everybody else
right
for 3 days trying to get it beat. Because when I receive an offer on the listing side, if it expires in 3 days, you'll probably get an answer in 3 days.
Right.
So that's that. Right. What's next? The deposit amount. That's kind of important in a sense, especially now if we're taking more liabilities. Right. You can make a very low deposit and say, you know, it's only $5,000. My clients don't give a shit. We'll take the responsibility. We'll waive the TDS. But if there's something great on that TDS, yeah, we're rich. $5,000 is no big deal. We'll just make a $5,000 liquidated. It makes it weaker, right? Because you have a lower liquidated damages, but maybe you take more risk, so that money is already hard. Someone might weigh that at a higher level. On the listing side, me personally, I only take a 3% deposit. If you don't have 3%, you don't have the down payment. We're not in it. We're just not in it. So, and I expect that when I'm representing a buyer too. Guys, you want to show the strongest offer, you offer 3%. That's the deposit. That's your risk. Sometimes you can increase the deposit in certain cases when the market shifts also. You might see that more often, but sometimes you see people put a small earnest money deposit initially, then when you remove contingencies in 10 days, we'll give you another 20 grand. That's a possibility. Don't see that very much these days. Usually people come with their 3%, and the liquidated damages clause is going to limit that to be the most the seller can take anyway. So even if they put more money in and they cancel, you have to give it back less 3% anyway. So that's that. Loan amounts. You know, is there going to be a financing contingency? Is there a loan, or is the buyer paying with cash? Then right after that, we have the occupancy type, because that's going to make a difference. On the listing side, what you look for in these things is to make sure that the percentage rates are realistic, that if they have a contingency. But if they put a contingency now and they have the rate not to exceed 3%, well, that's shitty, because it's over 3% now. This contract it is already in default to begin with. So just be cognizant of those rates, make sure that they're realistic. On the listing side, the higher they are, the better. That gives you a greater leeway.
Mark, can you say more about that on the interest rate? So if it changes, say within those 3 days, because you're like really tight on the margin in terms of their interest.
So if you have the financing contingency in place, it protects the borrower in the event they don't qualify or don't get the loan at the end of the day. And it protects the borrower in the event the rates adjust and the property is no longer affordable based on the new rate. So if your client's tight and they need to have that rate, it's good if you have that financing contingency to make sure.
Right, but if you're going in with no contingency, you don't even have to put the rate on there. That doesn't matter.
If they're going in with no contingency, leave it blank.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. If you leave it blank and you have a contingency, it's assumed that the buyer will just accept the highest, whatever prevailing rate of the day is. That means you don't get any protection in the event the rates go up. So know your situation, right? If your buyer is in the position to where they have the cash, it's not that big of a deal, then you can roll the dice a little bit. But if you're in a position where, yeah, the borrower barely qualifies and they're stretching to get into this house, and yeah, if the rates go up a quarter point, they can't afford it anymore, then you must put that in there to protect them.
Right, okay.
Yep. And then also make sure things make sense with that rate and the type of occupancy that they have. Right, if it's a primary residence and the rate's around 4%, it's realistic. But if it's an investment or a secondary residence, then I'd like to see that percentage needs to be a bit higher, because rates are higher for those types of purchases. Also, if the borrower is leveraging hard money, sometimes they write that as cash. Make sure you know how to identify that. And technically, hard money is really closer to cash than it is to being a loan, institutional loan. All right, B1, seller credits, if any, to buyer. Right, if the buyer is going to ask the seller for any type of credit. That's the great one I like to refer to in the event that the buyer is trying to get into your pocket. Hey, Mr. Agent, can I have a discount? It's like, well, what do you need? It's like, well, I don't have cash to cover this. Well, if I get it from the seller, is it good? It's good. Okay. Ask the seller for a credit. This is where you do it. Remember that any credits that given back to the buyer from the seller or the agents must be disclosed to the buyer's lender. And putting it here discloses it to the lender, because this document goes to the buyer, it goes to the lender. And also, if you have any additional financing terms, you put those there. And then the verifications. Good form to send everything with your offer, so that everything should be attached. If it's cash, see the money, proof of funds. Also need to see the down payment and closing costs, make sure the borrowers have that readily available. Sometimes they'll send me as Charles Schwab account as verification of funds. I respond to say, hey, let's liquidate those. Let's liquidate those and make sure that cash is in place so that you guys can close escrow. Because it would suck for the buyer, right? If the market crashed and now they can't buy the house anymore and they lose their deposit on top of that. It's like compounding the pain. So best to save the day and sell those stocks today. Make sure that you have the cash ready to close when the time comes. All right, there, the final verification of condition. By default, it says 5 days prior, so that means the house should be empty 5 days prior. Just make sure you're on the same page with the buyer or with the seller on that. Obviously, if the house is vacant now, that's one thing. Just like to conduct this final verification of condition after everyone's moved out. After everyone's moved out. Because you're checking to make sure they didn't damage anything on the way out. There's an assignment request. By nature, this is for the buyer to figure out how they're going to take title to the property if it's different than their name. Like maybe they want to buy it as a trust or a partnership or a business name. We can make that adjustment. Then the next section is for the contingencies. So contingencies are your points of negotiation, basically assigning risk. Who's going to take the risk for these certain factors, if you will? Loan contingency. By default is 17 days. This is a tough one to sell today, guys, because you're competing with a lot of times cash or you're competing with properly pre-approved borrowers. So they may take the risk of going without this contingency. Only take that risk if you've been completely fully underwritten pre-approved. So under H36B, I want to see that fully underwritten pre-approved box checked if you're going to forego L1 and have a 0 for the loan contingency. Check the no loan contingency box. Separate from a loan contingency is the appraisal. You can have an appraisal contingency without a loan contingency, and vice versa. This just verifies the value of the property. Now you do have some legal, I mean, we do have some insight and control. Like you guys should know if a house is going to appraise or if the appraisal is questionable based on comps, this analysis that you did when you wrote the offer. If there's comps that are higher than the offer that you're writing, you're probably not going to get the house. Joking. If you're writing above the highest, then you should know that potentially you may have some appraisal issues. You want to have that conversation with your clients. What happens if it doesn't appraise? Does it mean the deal is dead? Absolutely not. There's ways around it. Obviously, the buyer can bring in more cash. That's the easy way. But the loans can also be restructured, right? Not every lender has a hard line on 80-20. Just adjust the ratios. Borrower may need to pay mortgage insurance. That could be a difference maker, but doesn't mean they may still be able to close and perform if its appraisal is a little low and they don't have the cash. Their big contingency is the investigation of property. Now, for investigation of property contingency, if you guys are waiving it, make sure that you have all the documents or your client is an expert. So what we're looking for is a transfer disclosure statement, any avids from the agents, the seller property questionnaire, as well as any and all inspections. Now, don't forget the other 30 or so documents that are boilerplate disclosures, but they don't really pertain to the specific property. We're really worried about ones that pertain to the specific property. I personally, I always ensure that we have a property inspection, termite inspection. If it's a single family home, roof and chimney as well. If the other side doesn't provide it, I highly recommend the buyer take that expense. They're refusing that. I may take that expense, but I don't like transactions without inspections. It's a huge risk. Now, if your clients decide, Roberta, please.
This is going to go back a little bit to like your offer price. So I had a client recently ask me about offering kind of almost like a reserve amount on like an auction, sort of like eBay. And I looked it up, and on the California, so I don't remember the name of it now, what it was called. God, it's pissing me off that I can't remember, but I looked it up, and it basically is like you give the number that you're willing to go to.
Oh, we're talking an escalation clause.
Yes, yes, yes. So can you talk to me about that and to explain that? Do you know much about it?
Yes, I do, and we can explain about it. So an escalation clause, now around the country, they're being used. Here they were used the last run up, we kind of got rid of them. And well, we can strategically talk about why. But the situation is this: you make an offer of X dollar amount because you're afraid to overpay, but you're willing to pay more should there be another party that's also at that level. So basically, let's say list price is $9.99 and you offer, well, I'll offer $1 million, but I'll also offer 10,000 more than your highest offer, up to 1.2. Let's say that's the escalation clause.
And where
Does
is
that
that?
make sense?
Where is that? Is that on the contract? Where do you find that on the contract?
No, you have to write that in.
Oh,
There is no specific place for an escalation clause in the contract. That would be put under other terms.
okay. So you would say willing to pay 10,000 more than your highest offer that you have in hand, but then they're just going to shop anyway, regardless.
Right. Right.
I'm just, I'm failing to see the advantage.
You know, in areas where they aren't used to this multiple offer game, they're kind of coming to it. We kind of phased it out, about 10 years ago. And it's simply because, I mean, if you start accepting escalation clauses as a trend in general, you're going to get 15 offers with 15 escalation clauses, which means you're going to have to spend 4 days unraveling everyone's escalation clause. I have no time, desire, or diligence to do that. So give me your best offer or go home. Is my attitude on the listing side with that. And also, if you're telling me what you're up to, like let's say, oh, I'll go up to 1.2, then that's great. I'm going to call you back and say, tell you what, at 1.2, you actually have a chance, but I'm not going to show you anything. And at 1, you have none. You want to offer 1.2?
They're going to hold your feet to the fire. I'm just wondering if it's like
Right. That's what I would do.
Is it worth a try?
And,
you know,
and also as a listing agent, I would also warn the people with the escalation clauses and also say, I owe you nothing, which means that I will probably call you tomorrow and say it's pending before I call you tomorrow and entertain your escalation clause. So please give me your best offer.
So that's why they say, give us your highest and best, and that's the end of it.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So although in other parts of the country right now, they are fairly prevalent because they're not used to having multiple offers, we've kind of phased them out a while back. And again, if you're getting 10, 12 offers on a property, you don't want to sit there and have to unravel 4 or 5 escalation clauses and figure out who told what to whom. I'm just going to look at the ones and I'm just going to take the very best one.
Yeah, and that's your highest and best anyway, so why not just offer the highest and best?
Exactly.
I mean, another 100K above the.
Exactly. And it's just the interrogation. Mr. Buyer's agent, what are you afraid of? Do you not think it's worth 1.2? Do you think it's worth it? Okay. Well, if it's worth it, then why are we messing around? Let's do it.
Right. Well, for the buyer, it's like, oh, they want to have some security about them overpaying.
Oh, okay. I can appreciate that. Nobody wants to overpay.
Right.
But the situation is as such. The list price we know is irrelevant. You know where the comps are. Give me your best offer.
Irrelevant.
You know if they're overpaying or not. You see the comps. I see the comps. Make an offer they're comfortable with. Because we're not holding to that. I very rarely will counter people on price, especially if we're above that appraisal threshold. Doesn't make any sense. Because if you do, remember they have to close on that price. And a lot of times, and I see it exponentially more than I see everybody's beyond my own, is that a lot of times if the seller drives that too high, the buyer just backs out in 3 days. Now you're screwed because all the other buyers are pissed that you picked somebody else. Maybe someone will still be there, but level is going to be different. Conversation's different. Now you have to go back on the market. Now, why are you back on the market? What's wrong with your house? So you never get the same momentum the second time.
Hey, Mark.
Yes,
Harvey.
Harvey.
What if you say the buyer agrees to pay an appraisal value up to like 1.2? Should the
Yeah.
appraisal value exceed like the whatever you offered?
Yeah, that'll go a long way in easing the other side that you will, you've done your research, you're comfortable paying this price regardless of the appraisal, and you see the value there and you have the cash to overcome. That's awesome. That makes you in a better position to have your offer accepted.
And it's based on the appraisal. So
Correct.
you protect your buyer.
Correct.
Okay.
But you have to understand, do you have the appraisal contingency in place or not?
Yeah, you'd have to have the appraisal contingency in place, yes.
Yeah.
But these days, if you put that in there, you don't win.
It's tough, right? For me, as a listing agent, I only care, like if you put an appraisal contingency, but I know it's going to appraise, then I don't care.
Right.
But if you're offering 100,000 over the last comp and you have an appraisal contingency, I'm going to call you out on it. I'm going to say, dude, you're offering 100,000 over the last comp. You know it's not going to appraise. Why do you have this appraisal contingency?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Do you see the value at the offer you guys put there? If the answer is no, okay, great. I'll call you tomorrow with bad news. Because you're a problem. Well, obviously, right? It's going to be a problem. Or it could be a problem. Or you're writing offers that start off problematic.
Hey, to that note, being able to accurately identify what a home's going to appraise at, is that just checking the comps around that? I mean, how much wiggle room is there when an appraiser comes to a property?
There's a little, but not much. They're going to take time into account as well. So something that closed 30 to 60 days ago, right? Things have appreciated in time. So they give a variance on that. But if you're looking at the sold comps and within 3 to 5% above the highest one, you should be okay. But once you get above the highest one, it's always a question mark because you never know. Sometimes appraisers are having a bad day. They pick bad comps. That happens sometimes. That's why cash is king.
That's why cash is king.
Eliminates that. Because, that was a strategy, again, 10, 15 years ago, where they'd inflate the offer price, but they'd always have that financing contingency. So that way, 3 weeks down the road, after the appraisal comes in low, you're renegotiating. And back then, it was my lender, the appraiser was my appraiser. So I already knew we were going to screw you when I wrote the offer. So they eliminate that. And it's good that they eliminated that because you don't want to have that ambiguity. Because what ends up happening is now you're putting the value of the deal in the hands of an appraiser. I'm not comfortable with that because the appraiser's value is not necessarily a market value. Some appraisers are conservative and some of them are just bad. So why would I put my client's financial future in that person's hands? Not a good idea. So, we try to check the comps, and you should know based on the comps if something's questionably to appraise or not. So when they're in that contingency, then I ask, well, I think you're high. How do you feel about taking the risk? Because I want to hold you to the number you put on your contract. We're not going to adjust the price. I'm going to tell you right now. Because I didn't put the price, right? If I countered them up another, X number of dollars, well, they're going to come back to us like, well, buddy, no, we really thought the value was there. And you guys came with your competition and, forced me to come up higher. Now I'm not comfortable and I want to cancel. And that's something you want to avoid.
Thank you for going over that.
Yeah, for sure. So again, guys, removal or waiver of contingency, it says it in the box here. You know, it's against the advice of the agent. And then in the contingency removal too, it also lists that if you're removing this contingency without reviewing documents, it's against the advice of the agent. So the contract tries to cover our butt. Tries to cover our butt a little bit. So yeah, seller documents on top of the inspections. We get to review the preliminary title report. Make sure there's no easements that you don't like or encumbrances on the property that could be a problem down the road. Usually all encumbrances are covered in escrow though, so they don't transfer. You want to review your leased and liened items. Guess what this guy's all made? That's all about solar. There's solar panels, make sure there's no hurdles with those solar panels transferring to the buyer. And then our least favorite contingency is the sale of buyer's property. That's why it's last. I mean, the buyer still has something to sell. You would think that this would never happen in today's market, but lo and behold, last year I actually had a contingency to sell on a one-bedroom condo of all things. It's not like you want to work with these people. I really didn't, but I had two offers, and they were both contingent on the sale of a studio. Luckily, they got them sold and everything worked out. But I had no other choice. Those are the only two offers we had to work with. All right, time of possession. Next source of problem for us in our transactions. When is the buyer taking possession? Is the seller going to stay in past close of escrow? So we have to make sure that that's hammered out. If the seller stays beyond close of escrow and they're going to stay less than 29 days, you got to complete another form called the seller in possession form, SIP. It's a one-pager. If they're going to stay longer than 29 days, then you need to do an RLAS, residential lease after sale. Make sure that everyone is covered. A few things on that, guys. Understand where rent control exists in areas where rent control exists, because a lot of times we like to give away free rent backs. Careful with that, especially if it's longer than 29 days. There's a big difference between the 29-day SIP form and being in a property over 29 days. The difference is called tenancy. And there are laws that protect tenants. If you're working with the SIP, they're not really necessarily tenants. The SIP, it creates a tenancy similar to that of a hotel room, right? You can't take a room out at the Fairmont and then park your ass there for 60 days, claiming that it's your right to live there, it's your tenancy, and you don't have to pay the daily fee. No, they will kick your butt out in 3 days. Actually, not even 3 days, they'll kick you out the next day. And it's a similar situation with that SIP form. The seller's got to be out. There's no tenancy implied. But if the place has been someone's home for a while, like years, and they need to stay like 90 days, and you want to win the multiple offer game, give them a free 90 days, make sure that you do it in such a way that they're not staying in that place free for 180 days.
The loan can also expire too, right?
And also be mindful of the seller financing. Absolutely. Most banks will allow a 60-day window before the buyer must move into the property. So if the rent back, typically, if you accept the rent back, it's usually 60 days or less if the buyer's coming in as an owner occupant. But to cover yourselves, guys, if you want to give that free rent back, I list the rent. I list the market rent plus 10% on the form. And then in other terms, I write seller to credit rent for 30 days. That way they get the money back. But it's not, on paper, it's not as like a $1 rent. Hope that makes sense. That way, in the event there is a situation, an unpleasantness, so they have to stay longer or whatever, at least they have to pay you rent to cover. And if they're being assholes and not leaving and not paying rent, then at least the bill's accruing. You may be able to get a judgment down the road. But at the end of the day, you don't want a piece of paper saying that, oh, these guys rent's $1 a month and there's rent control and they're not leaving. Eventually shit'll get handled and ironed out, but you're going to go through a few weeks of hell with upset clients and probably calls to attorneys.
That sounds like a nightmare.
So best to avoid. I like to put in my in those contracts that especially the SIP, that the seller possession at this time is absolute. Any items left behind become property of the new owner to do with as they wish. And it's very easy to calculate how much of a deposit to put on the SIP. It's usually whatever junk removal fee is there. It's like $2 or $3 grand to clear a house. So worst comes to worst, I got money to pay the junk removal guy to get your stuff out of there as the new owner, if you don't leave. I had one situation like that. Sad, unfortunately. Mental illness was at play with the seller, but they were going to lose the house either way. Unfortunately, they hadn't paid their mortgage in a few months and they had a ton of equity. So the bank was going to take it either way. My investor bought it, gave them a fair price and a rent back. But at the end of the rent back, the lady was not leaving. So she forfeited her monies. And the buyer's agent was interesting because when we told him we weren't giving the deposit back, he was all, you can't do this to my client. And I'm like, buddy, do me a favor. Because he was my friend. I said, why don't you go to the property and then call me back? Let me know what we should do. So he did, and he called me back and said, yeah, go ahead and keep that $5,000 deposit. Because they left the place a total disaster.
More trouble than it's worth.
Yeah, so just make sure that you protect your clients in that case, right? Make sure they have enough cash there to cover. If we knew that there was a risk that this lady wasn't going to be copacetic in 30 days. So we put that in there. They had that money to be able to vacate the place. Okay. In possession, got that covered. Far. All right, document delivery is next. Proficient listing agents, you should have the documents already set up for them in a disclosure package. Ready when you go on the market, should be ready when you go on the market. That's when you're ready to take offers. When the market shifts, then maybe things will change and we'll have documents to follow. Not uncommon in areas where it takes a while to sell a house, right? We behave a certain way because we expect our homes to sell within 30 days for sure. So that, you know, all of our pre-inspections are all relevant. But understand, guys, in other parts of the country, either other parts of the state, you know, you can underprice by 10% and it could still take 3 to 6 months for a buyer to materialize to even look at the place, right? So in those cases, it may not be efficient to do all the pre-listing inspections that we do because it'd be irrelevant in a year when that buyer finally materializes. But in our area where we're expecting to sell things very quickly, it's good form to have everything ready for the buyer to make their strongest offer. What's included and what's excluded. We all know the drill from there. That doesn't change. Just make sure you check the boxes of things that are important to your buyers and if they exist in the property. And if there's things that are in the property that your buyer specifically doesn't want, make sure you write those in a 9P2. Like if there's an old ugly refrigerator in the kitchen, you know, you guys don't need to have their own. Yeah, please get rid of that refrigerator, Mr. Seller. Or if there's brackets on the wall for a TV that doesn't fit your TV, or in a place that you don't want them, you know, make sure that they remove those, write them there. All right, next is allocation of costs. You know, who pays for what disclosures where. This is going to go really by local practice, if you will, county by county. So whatever county you're writing this contract in, make sure it's better for him to adhere to the county. Obviously, everything is negotiable, but it's better for him to conform to the county norms, if you will. So in every county, the NHD is typically paid for by the seller. It's usually the first thing they order from escrow. Seller doesn't pay for it up front. It gets taken out at the end. And if it doesn't close, they don't pay. So that's why usually they do it. Who pays for this? Yeah. The CO2 and smoke detectors have to be there and the water heater must be braced, but it doesn't have to be on the seller to do it. Usually it is though. Understand where you're transacting. If there's any government required points of sale inspection reports, some places on the peninsula have sewer lateral inspection requirements. Some may have requirements for testing insulation and property efficiencies. San Francisco has that. So make sure you know what you're doing, where you're doing it. Yeah, some places may require corrective or remedial actions, like if there's a sewer lateral, you got to fix them before you transfer the property in the towns where it applies. Right, who pays the escrow fees? Santa Clara County, the seller typically pays. San Mateo County and Alameda County, the buyer typically pays. So it sucks to move from Santa Clara to Alameda County or to San Mateo County. You got to pay twice. That's what it is. Title insurance, who pays that? Typically sellers in Santa Clara County, buyers in other counties. However, the buyer's title insurance is always on the buyer. Right, it's not my fault as a seller that you need a loan to buy the house, Mr. Buyer. So if you want to insure your bank, it's on you. Transfer taxes, now county transfer tax everywhere. City transfer tax, you have to know the city if it has one. Almost most places. Now, in Santa Clara County, it's on the seller. San Mateo County, though, all the time the escrows are on the buyer. County transfer tax usually goes to the seller. City transfer tax in most places is split 50-50. But again, everything's going to border on local customs.
Quick question. When you're filling that out and you say you want to know what I say I'm doing it for another county other than Santa Clara that I haven't dealt with, how would I find out? Should I go to the county website to see
So if you Google customary closing costs in California,
okay.
you will get a results list of every title company that has basically a flyer on it.
Okay, sweet. Thank
They'll
you.
give you the breakdown county by county.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. And who pays for what in each county. You should have that as a reference on your computer. So you do. Right, HOA fees. To prepare the HOA disclosures, it's on the seller. So I try to get that check from the seller when you take the listing agreement. You want to get those HOA docs right away. The HOA certification fee has to deal with if the buyer has a lender and the lender cares about that cert. And again, as a seller, Mr. Buyer, you having a lender is not a problem. So you pay for your cert fee. Transfer fees, on the other hand, is negotiable. Typically, the sellers pay it. Typically, those transfer fees with the HOAs are included in those HOA fee for preparing the disclosures. So sometimes I have frugal clients that say, you know, Mark, I keep all my documents. I have all the HOA docs. We don't need to pay this $500 fee. And you call the HOA and say, yeah, you do, because the fee covers not only the doc prep, but also any transfers. So whether you pay us, whether we provide these papers to you or not, you're still going to give us $500 to transfer the house. So you might as well just do it, get it done with, get it taken care of. That's the private transfer fees. Other fees or costs, if you need someone to pay, you outline it there. You know, your buyers always have the right to inspect the property, whether you write it on this contract or not. If your buyer is going to run their own inspection and your buyer is going to pay for that inspection, I would leave it off this contract. If there is no inspections and you want the seller to pay for the inspection, then go ahead and put it in the contract. Reason being, if there's a loan, there's an underwriter checking everything. And if our underwriters are only looking for reasons to not press go and move forward. So if they see an inspection on here, they're going to want to see the inspection. And in my opinion, they don't have necessarily the expertise to decipher that inspection to begin with. So they have no business reading it to begin with, in my opinion. Therefore, if it's not noted in this contract, they're not going to ask for it. Usually things turn out okay. However, them getting this contract, they never do any, they're not going to do you any favors. They're only going to cause you problems. That's all I have to say about that. After that, the last one is our other terms. This is where I'd like for you to, if you're buying a property or if you're representing another real estate professional, this is where you would disclose that the buyer is a real estate professional. If you're looking for a credit from the seller, well, remember it was up and already, there was already a space for that further up. If the agent's giving a credit, this is a place that you can also disclose that to your lender by placing it here in other terms. Aside from that, I really don't like to see other terms on these contracts, guys. Unless you have a JD after your name, please call me and run it by me before you write something in other terms other than disclosing that you're a real estate agent, please. Kind of like, make sure you have the 3 letters CPA after your name if you're going to give tax advice. Kind of a similar scenario. Now, the thing about the contract is everything in this part, right? Every line item has a reference, right? So if you have an issue with items included and excluded, it's item P1. So if there's a term here that you don't like, that you need to counter, when you write your counter offer, you're just going to reference the term, right? So if you're writing a counter offer, you want to get a different purchase price. In the counter offer, you write 3A, right? Part 3A, and then write purchase price to be, so that we know that both sides know that this is the part of the contract we're addressing with our counter, right? 3A, we want a different purchase price. Or we don't want to pay those transfer fees. So item, whatever the transfer fee item is, or the natural hazard disclosure, we want the buyer to pay for it. So Q1, buyer to pay. You gotta get the idea what I'm saying? If you guys are counter offering, you just reference the paragraph in the chart, whether it's A, B, C, D1, D2, E1, and then make the change in the counter offer. So it leaves less ambiguity. Now, the clients, right, if they want further explanations about any of these terms, those explanations is what consists of the remaining 14 pages of this contract. So if you have questions about seller credit, where is it referenced? Paragraph 5E. So you scroll down and you see, oh, paragraph 5E, limits on credits to the buyer, and it explains further about that point. So again, if your clients have any questions on any of these terms, they're referenced in the paragraph in the chart. So if they're worried about the government point of sale, it's 10A, scroll down to 10A, it explains it. The biggest ones have to do with these contingency removals. Make sure your clients are comfortable and understand the risk they take when they remove those contingencies. And it's gonna, let's go there and review it, because paragraph 8 is important. Paragraph 8, contingencies and removal of contingencies, and it goes over how those work. If we look here on 8H, where it says removal or waiver of contingencies with the offer, it states it here in bold letters. Buyers shall have no obligation to remove a contractual contingency unless seller has provided all required documents, report disclosures, and information pertaining to that contingency. So you don't have to remove it if you have it and the seller has not given you the forms that they promised. If the buyer does remove a contingency without first receiving all required information from the seller, buyer is relinquishing any contractual rights that apply to that contingency. If buyer removes or waives any contingencies without an adequate understanding of the property's condition or buyer's ability to purchase, buyer is acting against the advice of the agent. So in writing, clear as day, it's written. Move your contingencies, you take the risk. So it's popular to remove contingencies with our offers to make our offers more desirable, right? It's popular. It's what's done these days. If the selling side is not providing you all the documents, understand that you're taking a huge risk. So as a seller, if I'm not providing these documents up front and I'm just being sloppy, you can't demand a non-contingent offer. It's one of those things like the devil's advocate. Free will has to, the person has to do it of their own free will. Can't be forced. As far as the removal of contingencies and items of that nature. So if the seller doesn't have his ducks in a row, guys, you can still make an offer. Just make sure you have the contingency in place to make sure that you can review those documents before acting on the contingency. Any questions or concerns?
In that case, when the seller's agent is, as you're saying, sloppy by the documentation, do they have any recourse, or could they just be like, you know, someone's gonna just these anyway?
You know, if someone's taking the risk and removing the contingency without having all the documents, they're taking that risk.
Right.
Whether you should take the risk or not is up to you and your client. In most cases, it's not worth it. It's not worth it. And right now we're in an anomalous market that we have such little inventory. People might be willing to take those risks.
Right.
But even as the seller side, I mean, you're going to get the most money if they give the clearest indication of the property condition. So there's no questions, right? When the buyer has a question, they're going to assign $1 to that question and multiply it before they translate that into what they're going to offer. So if you eliminate those questions, well, it frees the buyer up to offer more money. So on the listing side, it makes the most sense to have everything ready so that the buyers can make their strongest offer and not have to worry about, oh, why is this guy not giving me these documents? What are they hiding? Do we really want this house? Or do we really want to work with these people? They seem shady. So that will play into it too.
See your client saying.
Yeah, and guys, sometimes I know we don't like to lose. Some deals are best gone to other people sometimes. So if you have a seller that's not forthright, and you know, don't lose sight of the big picture, right? You're probably going to have to resell this house later down the road sometime if you keep it in contact. So make sure you make a good deal and a good situation for your client. and accepting or taking the risk, especially if it's a first-time buyer, of not having these documents, it's not worth it. It's just not. And even on the listing side, right? Nothing is absolute. Like no one just freely gives their money away. No one freely gives their money away. So if it's a situation where it looks like or it appears that you're coercing, there is coercion on your part to convince them to remove things early, then there's a good chance that it could backfire on you. And a judge or an arbiter could rule against you. So, best not to be shady and best always to protect your clients. If the information's not there up front, well, Mr. Listing Agent, why do you expect non-contingent offers when you don't have a TDS for me? Without a TDS, I can't take that risk. Maybe we should look at different properties. Right? All right, guys. We've taken up our 10:30 to 11:30 hour. If you have any lingering questions or concerns, feel free to reach out. You guys know how to get a hold of me. I know, because you call me.
Thanks,
So
Mark.
please continue. Yeah, please continue to do so. I'm here for you. Otherwise, we'll see you next month.
See you
Thank
then.
you, Mark.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Have a great afternoon, guys.